Good evening, everybody. Previous shirim on this week's parsha are from 3 years ago, Death on the Nile, from 2 years ago, Vital Signs, and from last year, Ascension. Okay, so a very special parsha this week because not only is it my late father's bar mitzvah sedra, it actually should have been my bar mitzvah sedra, but for one or two reasons, my bar mitzvah was deferred, but it happens to be my birthday today. Hashem has granted me another year of life, and I am indebted to the Ribono Shel Olam for granting me another year on this earth. Bezrat Hashem, many more, if I can give myself my own bracha. So, let's move on. Parashat Bo. And let's start off with a famous quote. First Perek Yud, that's 10, and Pasuk Tet, Pasuk 9. Vayomer Moshe, Bina'areinu uvizekeinenu neilech. Let's set the scene. The scene is that Egypt has been practically decimated by 7 plagues. This week's parasha, we've got another 3, and then that will be the end of that. The Jews will be released from Mitzrayim, and although that won't be quite the end of that, but it certainly will be the beginning of the open door for the Jewish people. But before the Jewish people left Egypt, Paro made a demand. He made a rather unreasonable demand. He said, I don't want you all to go. Why don't you leave the kids behind? Why don't you just go, just go for a couple of days. You don't need to take the kids with you. What's the point of that? So Moses made his famous remark, with our youngsters and with our elders we shall go. In other words, we are all going. It's all or nothing. We're not leaving one person behind. So, the simple explanation is that they were going as an entire nation, and it wasn't some sort of partial absence. But there's a deeper explanation here, and that is that wherever the young must go, the elderly must go. Wherever the elderly must go, the young must go. They are intertwined. So the elderly, you would think, well, what do the young people need the elderly for? The elderly are just a burden. They're just, excess baggage. I'm talking in a very crude way, obviously. People don't normally think like that. But when it comes down to it, people might think that, we're young people. We're young, fresh blood. What do we need the elderly holding us back for? The answer is the young cannot survive without the influence of the elderly. And by the same token, the elderly think, we have the benefit of experience. What do we need young people for? They're just a pain. They just sit on their iPhones and their iPods, wasting time. We know what life is about. We never had those things when we were young. So they feel that they've been there, seen it, done it. But young and old are intertwined, and we definitely need them. And I heard a beautiful story, and it's a famous story I'm going to tell you now. And you've probably heard it a zillion times before, but there are 2 slightly different versions of the story, and it's worth telling it if there's one person out there who will benefit from this story. And it's a story of none other than Rav Meir Shapiro, who was the rabbi who started the Daf Yomi project, which is the folio of Talmud every day, to be able to finish the entire Shas in 7.5 years, 2,700 and something pages. So that was his baby. That was his project. So the story is told of Rabbi Meir Shapiro's mother, who was found one day crying, her eyes out. And little Meir, who was maybe 7, 8 years old, came to his mother and said, Mama, why are you crying? So she explained, that she'd hired a melamed, a teacher, to come and teach little Maya Torah, and they'd agreed on a price which was 300 rubles. I think that was the currency in those days, which is an astronomical sum. But for her, although she couldn't afford it, money was no object when it comes to Torah and when it comes to teaching her son. And she was crying because the melamed was supposed to be coming that day from out of town to start teaching her little son, but he hadn't come. So she was worried. What happened if I never, we never agreed on an amount that was suitable for him? Maybe he wants more money. Maybe he's not coming. Maybe we'll never see him. And she was crying because her son wouldn't be learning Torah that day. But ultimately he did come. But she didn't know that. So her pain was because her son was not going to be benefiting from learning Torah. Now the other version of this story has it, they could both be true, had it that it happened that the Shapiros were moving home. They had to move from one part of town to another part of town or whatever. And during the move, little Meir didn't learn Torah for one day. He missed his studies for one day. And his mother was beside herself, crying. And little Meir said to his mother, "What's the matter?" And his mother said, "Oi, you missed one day of learning. If only you realized how every single day learning Torah is important." And apparently that's where he got the idea to do Daf Yomi, to show every Jew in this world, whether they do Daf Yomi or not, that every day is important for learning. Not a day should go by without us investing time into God's holy Torah. So that's already a very inspirational story. That shows what an influence our elderly have on us, and they still do. So there are 3 plagues in this week's parsha. If we move forward, same perek to Pasuk Kaf Beit, it talks about the darkness. That plague, the penultimate plague, where a thick, tangible darkness covered Egypt. Well, of course, it affected only the Egyptians. So we see here in the Pasuk, and I quote, "Vayet Moshe et yado al hashamayim." Moses put his hands up to the heavens. "Vayichoshech afela b'chol eretz Mitzrayim shloshet yamim." What happened? That there was 3 days of darkness, a thick darkness for 3 days over all the land of Egypt. Now, when we were kids, they taught us quite a lot actually, but they taught us that during this plague of darkness, a lot of the Jews died. For reasons we're going to discuss now, but the ratio was quite startling, quite staggering. 80%, 4/5 of the Jewish people died within that plague. It's like they were so close, but yet they missed out at the final hurdle. It's like that old war film. There was a war film where I can't remember, Baruch Hashem, I don't remember the details of the film. I just remember that there was a bunch of soldiers leaving. They went to raid like a German camp, and they went and they killed all the Germans. And when they came out, there was only a few, like 2 or 3 surviving. And as they were going out, one of them said, "Yay, we won, we won." And just at that moment, there was a German who shot him in the head. So he was just on his way to freedom because he jumped up. He got a bullet in the head. So near, but yet so far. So what was the point? That they had a year of watching Egypt being turned upside down, inside out, back to front, and they were on the brink of leaving Egypt. And it's not like a few of them died. We're talking only 20% left. So what happened? So there are 2 main answers I'm going to talk about today. And that is that there was something intrinsically wrong with the attitude of that 80% of the Jews who were in Egypt. Although there was some, some tangibility to their attitude. They definitely, it was mitigated by the fact that they were enslaved for 210 years. Ultimately, it was not a good reason. I'll tell you what happened. You see, these people, these Jews, were born into slavery. They were born in Egypt. Their parents were born in Egypt. Their grandparents were born in Egypt. All they knew was Egypt. They knew nothing about living in other lands. They'd never been to any other lands. All they knew was their own surroundings. Okay, so they lived a life of terrible torture and suffering, and they saw pain and death all around them. But at the end of the day, this was their land. This was where they'd always lived. This is all they ever knew. So for them, all this talk about leaving, during the time of the plagues, and Moses was giving them hope. No, there was sort of a few rumblings here and there. People were saying, well, we'll believe it when we see it. It's not really, I can't imagine leaving here, going into the desert. We've got everything here. Once the Egyptians are knocked off, we've got a whole beautiful land. We've got Las Vegas all for ourselves. Why should we leave? That's what they were thinking. But it never really amounted to anything with any substance. There was no, rallies and, petitions and everything. It was limited to a few mere grumblings. Now, when they were literally poised to leave Egypt, they were one plague short of getting out of there. Suddenly it became Lema'aseh. It became Lemaisa. It became real. It became tangible. Escape was at hand. Now they had the choice in front of them, or rather, they had to deal with the situation. They had to make a decision. What decision did they make? Well, they decided, listen, this is all we know. Why don't we just stay here? Once we get rid of the bad guys, we've got the cream of the land ready for us. It's an ideal situation. Who wants to go into the desert? So you're right, they had an excuse because this was their birthplace, the land of their fathers, etc., etc., etc. But it was wrong for one simple reason. Hashem said leave. And if you want to argue with Hashem, then you're standing on very dangerous ground. And they paid for it dearly, because they paid for it with their lives. So what was the cause? Suddenly they started making a fuss, and we're not leaving, and they dug their heels in. What happened? What changed? What changed from a little bit of simple rhetoric and a few, a mikveh conversations, as it were, people bantering here and there. Suddenly it became whole-scale, almost rebellion. No, we're not going. How could you? What is this? We never want to leave. What changed? So the answer is, there was one element which forced the thumbscrews to be turned, which changed the state of play. What was that element? It's that old force that comes into play at the most awkward moments. None other than the Yetzer Hara. What was the Yetzer Hara doing? For the Yetzer Hara, while there was no immediate risk to the Yetzer Hara of Jews leaving Egypt and going receiving the Torah, no, the Yetzer Hara wasn't bothered. Yetzer Hara maybe had a little bit of a break. People had, like we said, had a few murmurings. There's no immediate emancipation from slavery at hand. No, we're still at the plague of blood, let's say, or we're still at the plague of frogs or lice. No, there's nothing. We've still got another 7, 8 plagues to go. No. Suddenly it was plague number 9, and there was like a furore. There was release from Egypt was in the air. Now suddenly it became practical. Now the Yetzer Hara started saying, hey, I better get into action. I can't let these people leave. So he turned up the heat. And now people start coming up with all these excuses and tachbulot and everything and every excuse under the sun why they didn't have to leave. But it only became relevant there and then when they were on the brink, on the cusp. And that's why they paid for it so dearly. Because the Yetzer Hara really gave them a run for their money. But they missed the point. They really missed the point, because Hashem says move, you move. That's really all it comes down to. You were defying the words of Hashem. And you were defying the words of the prophet of Hashem. So that's not something you want to get involved with. But it just got me thinking that so many times, we start getting busy and getting involved and start, making a whole fuss and everything about, this is never going to happen, and starting to feel the wrong attitude and coming out and objecting. But the answer to your problems is just around the corner. Don't you realize? That's why you're starting to feel this negativity, and you start to feel this disconnection with Hashem, and you start to feel that air of rebellion, and that you don't want anything to do with it. But wait, just wait. Because you don't know, salvation is at hand. And maybe nowadays people feel there's a lot of anti-Jewish propaganda in the air. I mean, I don't want to go into the whole situation in France. We all know what happened in France and all the things that happened in Haranoff, etc. How much terrible anti-Semitism there is in this world, and people are now feeling maybe, that they feel a sense of despair. But wait, don't give up now. You feel you want to give up. You feel helplessness and hopelessness and people flinging out their hands and saying, from whence will our salvation come? Just wait. The more the thumb screws are turned, the nearer it's going to come, the nearer the Geula is going to come. That's the nature of the Geula. It's not going to come and everyone's happy and waiting. It's going to come when we least expect it. Even though, we're going to wait every day, but it's going to happen when we least expect it. But it's going to happen. And it's not going to happen when we're all sitting, I always give this mashal, in our nice air-conditioned Beit HaMidrash, and everything's nice and fine and dandy, and the weather's wonderful, and everyone's saying, hey, Jews, I love you, we love you, we're the greatest people. That's not what's going to happen. I wish that would happen. I wish it would be all nice and rosy. But it ain't necessarily so. We can see it from our day and age. When Mashiach is at hand and the world is upside down. It's literally upside down. So salvation is imminent. We cannot give up. We cannot give up. And the second reason really is a progression from the first reason. Because what happens when a person feels all this negativity, these excuses, and they're making all these scenarios? What happens? Where is that born from? Where does that come from? It comes from a sense of hopelessness. It comes from depression. And depression and hopelessness are born from a lack of faith in Hashem. Again, it's as simple as that. Excuse me even for oversimplifying it. But that's what it is. Because if we're not plugged into Hashem, then of course we're going to feel hopelessness. If we don't realize Hashem is behind everything and Hashem is helping us, then of course all you've got to do is read the newspaper for 5 minutes, and I guarantee you will fall on your face you'll feel total desolation. Everything that's happening to Klal Yisrael, and all the atheism, and all the wars and the suffering and the starvation, everything. You drive yourself mad. How can you believe in a world like that? A world that's spinning around on its axis and going out of control? How would you not feel helplessness? Kaveh Hashem. Chazak ve'ametz lebecha kavel Hashem. You have to place your hope in Hashem, not in any government, not in any situation, any people, any leader, or any hero. Just in Hashem. Because it might not solve all your problems just to turn around and say, now I believe in Hashem, now everything's going to be fine. But I tell you, you'll be in a much better place than if you were not with Hashem. So, depression and helplessness are definitely not a Jewish perspective. It's definitely not going to get you anywhere. To throw up your hands and say, what will we do? How will we get through this? And okay, I'm talking, I'm talking abstractly, and I'm talking, what's the word? Out of context. And God forbid, when a person is in that situation and he really feels where can he turn, it is difficult. I can't imagine how difficult it was for the Jews at that time, that all they knew was that they just had this slave mentality. And they didn't know anything different. All they knew was suffering and pain. And it was like the Holocaust 100 times worse. The Holocaust lasted for what? 6 years, something like that? 7 years? 7 years of sheer... I can't find worse words for that. Try multiplying that by 50. Am I about 50? 40. What's 60 to 210? Okay, 300, maybe 70. Try and multiply that by 210 years of slavery, of butchering, and babies being killed, and their blood extracted and being put in Pharaoh's bath. We can't even conceive of such suffering. And people were born and lived, and that was their entire life. Any hope of being released from that prison was just a pipe dream. So their hope was at ground zero. So we can't put ourselves in their situation. And you're right. Yet they had every excuse not to leave and to stay where they were. But they were woefully short of the mark. And us, of course, we see terrible things in our day and age, but we couldn't have had it as bad as they did. We couldn't have had it as bad as they did. And we don't want to be just 20% who appear at the Geula and go with Mashiach. We don't want to even be 99.9%. We want a full 100% out there, ready to go with Mashiach to Eretz Yisrael. One person left out of that equation is disastrous. So we need to get with the program and pray. Now, since the last couple of months, I know in the UK they've stepped up the security measures. So all the schools are taking on extra security. I know one of our kids' schools, Noam Primary School, they've taken on extra security guard. They've got they've got like a gate, the new security gate. They've got other measures in place. Many other schools and shuls and Batei Medrash, they've put in some pretty serious security measures. And the CSC have also been stepped up their game, as if they weren't doing enough already. They're doing even more. And this is all necessary. We have to do that. We cannot rest on our laurels. But I want to suggest an additional measure of protection that may not have necessarily be covered by the CST and by the extra security measures that people have been taking. And that is, we need to protect ourselves by ma'asim tovim and learning Torah and mitzvot. Because whereas there's no question, we need the physical protection. We don't want to be caught short. At the same time, we don't want to be caught short spiritually. So now, more than ever, we have to step up to the plate. And we have to spend a little less time wasting time and convert that time into protection time. Time that will help us and our brothers and protect us when we need it most. And I can't think of any time that we need it more than now, when there's meshuggahs going into grocery stores and doing what they do. So instead of reaching into your pocket and pulling out your phone, don't do that. Put your phone in your pocket and put something else in your pocket. Go and take out a Mishnah. And when you're waiting, you've got time at a wedding. There's plenty of time at a wedding, especially when the photographer is taking his pictures and there are people waiting around. I know, because I'm on the other side of that. I see people waiting to have their picture taken. And it takes time, you know. Baruch Hashem, my wife and myself, we're quite efficient when it comes to taking pictures. We don't like people dilly-dallying around. We want them to go and enjoy the wedding. But it's inevitable there's time when people are sitting down and they're waiting and they're just chatting aimlessly. But why are you chatting aimlessly? It's very nice to socialize. But if there's an hour of socializing, why don't you take 5 minutes out, pull out a Mishnah and learn one Mishnah? It's not going to kill you to learn one Mishnah. You're sitting at a bus stop. It's not going to kill you to learn one Mishnah or one halakha, 2 halachot. I've still got my daily halakha program that I'm sending by email every week. Baruch Hashem, we have a few subscribers. I'd like to double that. I'd like loads of people to be subscribed to that. By the way, if you want to subscribe and get a 2-minute audio halakha every day, B'ezrat Hashem, send me an email. rabbikalati@gmail.com. We'll put you on the list. You get a halakha. You could listen to it. It's 2 minutes, 3 minutes every day, direct to your computer or whatever it is. You get a couple of halachot every day. That's only going to add to the merit of Klal Yisrael. Can you imagine what would happen if everybody learned halachot every day? Everybody learned and did mitzvot every day and increased and taught their brothers and brought their brothers closer. Can you imagine? There wouldn't be any of this nonsense and garbage going on. It would evaporate. That's what's so... It's frustrating in a way. It's frustrating in many ways. And really, I get very passionate about this. But we just got to do what we've got to do. And we've got to look at our brothers and help our brothers and bring them closer. We who know better, we've got to bring them closer. And we need all the help we can get. So to feel depressed and helpless is not the way. We've got to convert that into good. We've got to bring out our Mishnayot. We've got to bring out our halachot. We've got to do every mitzvah we can and convert that wasted time into sacred time, which will build a fence around the terrorists and push them away. B'ezrat Hashem. So, sorry about that. I hope I haven't offended anybody. Mechila in advance if I've upset people. Now, next pasuk 23. We're still talking about the darkness, and I heard a beautiful darush, a beautiful exegesis on pasuk 23. So it says in 23, Lo ra'u ish et achiv. One man didn't see his brother. A man couldn't see his brother. The darkness was so thick, they literally couldn't see the fellow would be in front of him, he couldn't see him. V'lo kamu ish mitachtav. Nor could anyone rise from his place shalosh yamim for 3 days. Yeah? This is talking about the Egyptians. So, the simple meaning is that literally a person you could be almost nose to nose with somebody and you wouldn't know they were there. And more than that, it says nobody could rise from their place. So we're told it was like thick darkness that made a person be not stultified, what's the word? Paralyzed. They were literally paralyzed. A person who was in the midst of sitting down will be frozen sitting down. A person who will be stretching like this to get out of bed will be stuck like this. It was wholesale paralysis among the Egyptians. Meanwhile, for the Jews it was or of a simcha. They were having a whale of a time. The 20%, that is. The 80% were dying. But the 20%, they were totally unaffected by the darkness. So that's the simple meaning. But you want to hear now what the Rebbe from Alexander says. It's a beautiful Hasidic taich on the Pasuk. He says, the Pasuk says, no man saw his brother and no man rose. Think about what we just said. When a person doesn't see his brother and feel his brother's pain and bring him in and give him a sense of helpfulness instead of helplessness, and give him a sense of hope instead of a sense of despair. If a person does not do that for his brother, then no man will rise. Nobody will get up. Nobody will benefit. We'll all be islands amongst ourselves, going nowhere, running around in circles. You hear that? What the Alexander Rebbe is telling us? If we don't see our brother, we're not going to rise. We'll stay where we are. What comes out of that? If we help our brother 1 to the second, and we just spread our light, then of course we're going to rise. Of course we're going to be pulled out of this galut. Of course we're going to get up. You think Hashem wants the galut for us permanently? God forbid. Hashem is poised. He's ready. It's so imminent, you can always taste it. And that's why we have to pull out all the stops now more than ever. Let's go to the next Perek. How are we doing for time? Okay. Perek 12, that's Yud Beit, Pasuk 26 and 27. That's Chaf Vav and Chaf Zayin. 1 second. Let's get there. A bit slow on the uptake today. Okay. So this is talking about the children. The children will ask their parents. How do I translate it here? What is this service to you? This should be very familiar to all of us, because this is what we say on Seder night, yeah? These parashot have got the flavor of Pesach. We should be chalishing, even the women who do so much work and who sometimes feel a little bit negative towards Pesach because, you know, a lot of the burden is on them and they work harder than most men that I know, and they deserve all the credit for it, but sometimes it's a bit daunting for them. I would say, look, you should feel now a sense of pride in the work that you do, and that Pesach is coming up very shortly. And every Jewish woman who works for a family to bring a kosher Pesach home for their family should be blessed with abundant brachot, and they will be blessed, and they're going to see phenomenal shefa and bracha because of what they do for their families. So this we say at the Seder. So it's the children asking a question to their parents, and then the next pasuk says, "Va'amartem zevach Pesach hu Hashem." This is the sacrifice of the Pesach sacrifice for Hashem. Asher Pesach al batei bnei Israel mitzrayim, and the people explaining to their children that, you know, Hashem passed over the houses of the Jewish people and he killed all the Egyptian firstborn, etc. And they're telling the story. So we are told that the Jewish people were very pleased at this situation. Why? Because they thought, oh, we're going to have children. Your children will tell you and will ask you questions. That means we're going to have children. We couldn't be happier. They were so happy when they heard this. So the simple question is asked, what do you mean they were happy they're going to have children? They were having 6 at a time, according to the most simple opinion. Some say 60 at a time, yeah? You think you've got it hard now having twins? Imagine having 60. And, you know, I think there's opinions even more than that. They were proliferating at a phenomenal rate. So the women, the families there in Egypt, the Jewish families, were no strangers to having children. So for this, when it says here your children will ask you and tell you, why were they getting so excited about having children? This was not some big chidush for them. They were all barren and then suddenly they were having children. So what's the answer to this? Oh, by the way, the proof that the parents were happy is because it says the people bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. Why did they bow down and prostrate themselves? Because they were delighted about the news about the children. So what was the big chiddush? What was the novelty about being told they were going to have children? Because a person can have a child or children and perhaps they won't get nachat from their children. Every parent wants nachas for their children. I don't know how to translate nachas. Joy, how do you translate? Joy it's not a very adequate explanation. Nachas, they want to feel that their lives have proved purposeful by having children who will follow in their ways and even exceed in their ways. Maybe that, you could say that is nachas. It's a sense of fulfillment. It's a sense that you've passed on to your children the correct way and they're on the path. That's nachas. Well, that's part of what nachas is. So sometimes we don't get nachas from our children. Sometimes whatever we put into them, they rebel. And it's not always happy. And it's not always rosy. And we hear stories about teenage problems and, kids going off the derech. It's terrible. As if the world isn't crazy enough, some of our brothers are going to join them. Chas v'chalila. It's terrible. So, that is not nachas. That is not what we came into this world to do. What happens if you have a child and the child looks up at you with beautiful brown eyes and they look up at you and they say, Daddy, or Mummy, or Tati, or Mummy, or Booby, or Zaidi, or whatever it is, and they say to you, can you teach me about the Pesach sacrifice? I want to know. Can you teach me about tzitzit? Can you teach me about giving tzedakah? How much chesed do I have to do? What do I need to do on Shabbat? Can you teach me the Shema? Can you help me with my Kodesh homework? What happens when a parent hears that? There's no greater nachas than when a child turns to his parents and asks him, and he's engaged, and he's enthusiastic. And you're thinking, I hope you have this enthusiasm and you build on it, and you take it with you throughout your life. There's no greater joy for a parent to hear that from their child. And that's why the Jews were so pleased when they heard they were going to have children. Not just, okay, we have children. Of course we're delighted to have children, no matter what. But to have children who are following the derech and they're asking the children and they're engaged and they're in questioning and they want to know and they're plugged in. Of course, the Jews were going to prostrate themselves and bow down to Hashem and say, thank you, Hashem, for giving us such beautiful children. And we want to keep them like that. And they should get even better. Of course they were happy that their children were connecting to Hashem like that. And we must all rejoice in our children when they give us nachas like this. Really and truthfully, whatever they do, we should be proud of them. And we should be behind them. Because we never know, even if they're off a derech, we never know when they're going to turn back. How many stories we've heard of people who went into the Tehom. They went into the abyss. And they turned back and they became tzaddikim. Look at that story I told you about Rav Avadia. About that boy who was a street urchin. He was a street gangster. And Rav Avadia turned him around and he became a dayan on the Beis Din for 25 years. How much further can you get than that? I can't think that guy must have traversed miles and miles spiritually to get where he got to. So there's so many stories. But we have to encourage every bit of positivity that our children show us, especially when they're children. Every time they come home and they say, Abba, I was Shabbos daddy today, or I was Shabbos Ima today, or I got a prize because I learnt my Mishnah off by heart, or I went through the Pesukim and I got the Rashi, and nobody else in my class got the Rashi. I'm so happy. We should be encouraging that. We shouldn't go, oh, I'm too busy. I'm busy. Come back to me when I'm not so busy. Every gem they come out with like that, we have to jump on it. Jump on it and encourage it. Because they need it. Kids need so much building these days. More than when I was growing up 49 years ago. More than that. Way more than that. The world is changing. They need so much positive reinforcement, I can't tell you. So now we get to the end of the Parsha. And the end of the Parsha, Perek Yud Gimel, is dedicated to that wonderful mitzvah that we have in Klal Yisrael. The mitzvah of tefillin. What a beautiful mitzvah we have. Putting on tefillin every day. The men, that is. And we should never take this mitzvah for granted. And we should relish the time when we have the tefillin shel yad and the tefillin shel rosh on our arm and on our head. We should relish that time in Shachar. We should be sad when we take them off. So now I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to finish off. As I shortchanged you last week. I didn't give you any stories last week. So I'm going to give you one story this week. It's a story about a fellow, a young chap, who was a yeshiva bocher. And he went to volunteer in like some sort of old age home, like a nursing home or something. And a lot of the not the inmates, what do you call the residents? Inmates is definitely not the right word. A lot of the residents there were, not so observant. And this young chap, let's call him Chaim. This young chap, Chaim, would like to, was very fond of encouraging the different people to pray. He was encouraged the elderly women to pray, and encouraged the elderly men to pray. And the men, he had a pair of tefillin, and he would go around, maybe putting the tefillin on. Maybe he was a Lubavitcher, I don't know. Lubavitcher experts at putting tefillin on. They should be praised and blessed for their work in outreach. Hashem should bless them with the koach to carry on, and we should all take example and be envious of them and take an example from them and do it ourselves as well. Don't just leave it to them. Yeah? Let's also do such work, holy work, encouraging our brothers and helping our brothers. Anyway, so this chap Chaim was, he liked to help, and some people were very receptive. They said, "Oh, I haven't put on tefillin since when I was a little kid." And you see, they get so emotional. I've seen it myself. Elderly people, when we put tefillin on them, and it's such a beautiful thing. And some people were maybe a little bit less responsive, and they, maybe, okay, fine. You can only try. You cannot force. We try our best. But there was one person, one resident in that nursing home, who not only was he not receptive, not only was he indifferent, he was even antagonistic. And every time somebody suggested put on tefillin, he would fly into a rage and become very cross and start being maybe even a little bit abusive. So this fellow Chaim decided, you know what, I'm going to try. Where others have failed, maybe if I approach in the right way, maybe I might be successful. So he approached the elderly man, and he got the same story. He got the same brush off. But this time the old fellow said to Chaim, "Come to my room, I want to show you something. I want to tell you a story." So Chaim went to the old fellow's room, and the old fellow told Chaim the following story. He said, "I am a survivor of the Holocaust. Now, I watched people around me being killed in cold blood. I saw the most horrific things. I can't even bring myself to talk about them because it's just too painful for me. And when I was in the camps, I was there with my father. And in this camp, somebody found a tefillin shel rosh, the head tefillin, without the arm tefillin, just the head tefillin. And when they found them, everyone was so happy. They would take turns to put it on every day, even for a short time. Even though it's incomplete without the yad, tefillin shel yad, that was what they had. They would rush to put on the tefillin. And then we heard that there was somebody who was transferred to that camp who had a full pair of tefillin. He had tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh. And it happened that unfortunately this fellow was taken and he was executed by the Nazis, Yamach Shemam v'Zichron. And when my father heard about this, he decided he wanted to run to go to the barracks and find the bunk where that fellow had been staying and see if he could find the tefillin. And at risk of his own life, he ran into that bunk and he found the tefillin. And he quickly ran from that barracks, go back to his own barracks. But as he was running through the compound, the Nazis saw him. And in front of my own eyes, I watched the Germans gun down my father in cold blood. And his life was wasted because of a pair of tefillin, 2 leather boxes. And when the old fellow was telling the story, he opened up the drawer and he showed young Chaim, he'd still got the 2 tefillin there. He said, my father died for these tefillin. Was it worth that he gave up his life for 2 leather boxes, dirty straps? That was what he died for? That was the sum total of his life? And of course, we can never, ever, ever judge anybody who's been through the pain like the Holocaust. We don't know. We should never know what they suffered. We can only possibly imagine, but certainly we cannot judge. So of course, Chaim was besides himself when he heard this terrible story and how this poor old fellow was broken. He was a tzabrochen Jew. He was a broken Jew. And he turned his back on his religion. He felt so embittered. But he still felt that this was not the answer. But he decided, for the time being, I'm going to avoid this old man. I don't want to be in conflict with him. I don't want him to become embittered and maybe I'll just avoid him. But it happened that there was one another resident in the nursing home who needed to say Kaddish. So they were making a whip round to find a minyan. And all they found was 9 people. They needed 1 more. And of course, who was the last one who had to help them? It was this old man with the tefillin. And it fell on, this young Chaim to go and get this old man. He said he wanted to leave him for the time being, but he had to. Someone had to say Kaddish. So he thought, you know what? I've got to do what I've got to do. So Chaim went to see the old man and he said to him, excuse me, I'm really sorry to disturb you. I know, you told me this whole story about the tefillin. I'm very sorry that I had to hear such a thing, and I feel for you, but I want to ask you something. There's somebody here who needs to say Kaddish, and we're 9 people. If you come and make up the minyan, you'll help him to say Kaddish for his lost relative. Will you please do that? Don't do it for me, do it for this poor fellow. And something he said must have touched the old man, and the old man said, I'll come. And then Chaim decided he's going to go and go 1 step further. And he stilled himself and he said, maybe you want to bring your tefillin as well? So the old man said to him, if I bring my tefillin, will you leave me alone and stop talking to me about this? Chaim says, you won't hear from me anymore about this. The old man said, okay. He brought his tefillin, he made up the minyan, and he put the tefillin on. And Chaim, at the end of the prayers, he looked round and he saw the old man with tears in his eyes. And he was the last one in shul. And he still had his tefillin on. And Chaim came up to the old man and he said, are you okay? Is everything all right? And he said in Yiddish, I can't even begin to imagine hearing such a thing. He said, I can feel my father. I can feel my father when I've got these tefillin on. And he was crying bitter tears. And something must have moved that old man. Because he put the tefillin on again the next day. And he must have got the same feeling of connection with his father. And he carried on and he carried on. And Chaim made a great connection and formed a solid friendship with this elderly man until, unfortunately, one day Chaim came in and he found out that the old man had passed away. And shortly afterwards, Chaim was approached by the daughter of this old man. And the daughter said to Chaim, he said, you don't know what you've done. You gave my father hope. Because my father felt so connected to his father. And he felt so enlivened and invigorated by this one simple mitzvah you gave him. He said he couldn't wait to put it on his tefillin every day. And even when he was dying, he asked me, he said, bring me my tefillin. And in fact, he died wearing his tefillin. So, of course, the message is clear. Of course, tefillin is an important mitzvah. But it just shows you. We said, right at the beginning of the shir, with our elderly, with our young. What happens if Chaim would have just ignored the old man? He would have felt insulted by the old man shouting at him and telling me, well, what do you want me to put on tefillin for? And he would have gone away and would have felt bitter. And he would have said, oh, some old man shouted at me today, how dare you? That could easily have happened. And perhaps we could turn around and say, you know what, okay. He felt hurt, But look what happened, because Chaim went back for more. And he put his pride away from him. And the young approached the old. And they connected. And I'm sure, I've got no doubt that old man, especially after what he suffered and what he saw and the horrors that he saw, that him with that mitzvah tefillin went together to Gan Eden. Yiratzon, we should take on board the powerful lessons of this week's Parsha, my father's Bar Mitzvah Parsha, and learn we have to go forward as a unit. It's not just the young who go by themselves and leave the past behind. It's not just the elderly who go and they see, what do we need the youth for? We know everything, we've done everything. We have the benefit of experience. It doesn't work like that. And what about the excuses that we give not to learn, not to take part, not to be part of a community, not to pull our finger out and get on with what needs to be done? And Mashiach's around the corner, and the Yetzer Hara is laughing because he's got us with every single excuse for us to turn our back on Hashem and turn our back on what we should be doing. And Mashiach's waiting patiently. Like my Rebbe used to say, he's shining his buttons, waiting to make that appearance. And how can we not watch our brother's pain? Because we'll never get up if we don't see our brother's pain. And one last thing. I want to end off on a positive note. Let's go back to Perek 11. One very brief point. So I want to end off on a positive note. There's a pasuk which people say, and they memorize this pasuk. It says, Perek 11, pasuk 7. Ulchol bnei Israel lo yecharatz kelev l'shono l'meish v'ad behema l'man teidon asher yafle Adonai ben Mitzrayim uben Israel.
It's a pasuk that we say whenever we see dangerous dogs. You know, you go to the park and you get chased by a dog. Say this pasuk, it will help. What's the translation? Where is it? But against the children of Israel, no dog shall wet its tongue against neither man or beast, so that you shall know that Hashem will have differentiated between Egypt and Israel. When the Jews left Egypt, the dogs were silent. Which dog do you know when you walk up to him, he's silent? Sometimes dogs are like that, but generally no, they'll come. And you walk past them, they'll bark. They might even try and bite your leg. Yeah, but every single dog in Egypt just said, Chavod, just walk through, no problem. We're not going to bite you. We don't want any food, no bones. Chavod. Of course not, it's totally unlikely. You know why? Because when the Jews went out of Egypt, they were besimcha. They were so connected to Hashem, they were so proud. Hashem said, my Jewish people are leaving Egypt, and their joy should be marred by having dogs barking. I'm even going to stop that. No dog will bark at all, so that their joy will be totally complete. Yehi Ratzon. Hashem should give us the reason to be besimcha, and we should all fight against the tide of depression and realize there's only one Hashem, and that alone should make us besimcha. And then when that day comes, it should come soon without any further delay. Hashem will stop every dog from barking and will complete our simcha, because we will run into the open arms of Mashiach Tzidkenu. It should happen techef umiyad. V'chein yasam v'lamar amen.